Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for Cybersecurity Sales for MSPs. My name is Mark Jennings, and after 33 years in the MSP industry, I founded OTX Partners LLC. We help MSPs manage risk in the ever-increasing threat environment in the MSP industry. As part of that mission, we established OTX Roundtable GRC, which is a peer-based best practices group focused on adopting and maintaining compliance with an established cybersecurity framework. We identify controls, implement tools, and document policies and procedures and audit our results in a supportive and accountable environment. But first, a little bit of housekeeping. So we're recording today's presentation, and we'll be making that recording available in a couple of days to everyone who signed up. And if during the presentation you have a question, please use the Q&A section at the top of the screen, and we'll try to answer all those questions before the end of the webinar. Implementing proper cybersecurity controls and achieving compliance is laborious and expensive. Our fees must reflect the investments we make in improving our security and that of our clients. Our sales team must be able to articulate the risks and reasons why our clients need the protection we offer. We must also be able to explain why our fees may be higher than competitors offering less secure solutions. Cybersecurity sales is not the same as selling traditional MSP services. Jennifer Bleam joins us today to provide some simple techniques you can use to educate prospects on the risks and potential ramifications while building a trusting relationship. Jennifer is a best-selling author and an award-winning speaker and respected leader in the IT channel. She has coached over 1,000 MSPs on marketing, sales, and best practices based on her real-life success in an MSP business as an MSP business owner. Jennifer also grew a channel-only cybersecurity software firm from startup to acquisition in less than 2 years. Part of her role included coaching MSPs on how to sell cybersecurity to small and medium-sized companies. Jennifer trained with Sandler Training and attended CharTec Sales Lab. She founded MSP Sales Revolution to help MSPs master the art of cybersecurity sales quickly, easily, and profitably. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Jennifer, and I will stop sharing my screen so you can share yours.
I love it. It's like we've done technology once or twice in our life. All right. Yes. Can you confirm that you're seeing my screen?
I can confirm that.
I love it. Nothing worse than getting like 15 minutes into a training session and then Mark says, we can't see your, are we
can't see your screen.
Yes, exactly. Yep. All right. So awesome intro. Thank you so much. And I am very, very excited to be with each of you today. You can see on the screen, we're going to be talking about not talking about building it, but talking about selling it. So too often it's a little bit like Field of Dreams, where we all want to believe as business owners that we have the most beautiful baby in the world. And if we build it, they will come. And that does not happen. You have to be able to prove the value of what you're offering, whether it's cybersecurity, compliance, co-managed. And so what is the point of building a phenomenal offer if you can't sell it, and sell it very profitably, I hope. And so that's what we're going to be talking about for the next 40 minutes or so. Definitely drop your questions in the Q&A. We'll answer those at the end. We've got time allotted to do that. And then Mark just introduced me to you, and so I have a ton of sales experience, real world, in the trenches, everything from smiling and dialing for health insurance, life insurance, disability. And then about 20 years ago, I shifted into the MSP space. At the time, it was break fix, and then it became managed services, and then managed security ultimately after that. Lots of sales training, hundreds of sales books, and probably there is a very good chance that if you mention a sales book or a sales leader, that I've either read the book, studied the book, trained under them. I love learning all about sales and marketing. And then in March of last year, I wrote my first book. It hit the bestseller list, which is such a cool thing to say. And it's called Simplified Cybersecurity Sales for MSPs. It is on Amazon. And by September 1st, it will also be on Audible. That has been a labor of love. That is a conversation for another day. But the thing that I like about this book is that it takes all of the knowledge from these greats that I've accumulated over the last several decades and put them into ideas and tactics and scripts and frameworks that work for our industry. Because I was always challenged when I went to industry events and I'd hear a great speaker, like maybe a Dan Kennedy or a Tom Hopkins or, whatever, and they're talking about like how to sell cars. And their analogies were great and their stories were fantastic. And sometimes the scripts were good, sometimes they were cheesy. But I really struggled in that moment while I was sitting in a ballroom to say, okay, you just taught me how to sell a car. How do I apply that to an intangible, a service that someone has to pay for, typically every month, typically for 3 years, maybe with a project at the beginning of it. And those two things are very different. Sell a car with the features versus sell a service offering with monthly recurring revenue that probably the buyer doesn't really understand. And so when I wrote this book, I really wanted to bring all of these concepts down into real life. And so that's what's inside of the book. And we're going to take apart some of the concepts in the book and unpack them in some really new and creative ways. So I've really got 3 things that I'm going to cover today. The first is what I call the risk-based selling matrix. Because if you've ever had a conversation like, yeah, I understand what you're saying, Mr. Salesperson or Mrs. Salesperson, but I don't think it will happen to me. I don't really want to spend money on what looks like insurance. And I don't really think it will happen to me. And if it does happen to me, it's not going to impact my business that much. So kind of thanks, but no thanks. If you've experienced that, then this risk-based selling matrix is going to help you because you're going to see exactly where that conversation perhaps went off the rails and then how to right that going forward, kind of how to right that ship. And there's really 2 pieces of the puzzle that we're going to talk about inside of the risk-based selling matrix. One is likelihood and the other one is impact. And we need both of these pieces. These are kind of the 2 arguments, if you will, when you go to have a sales conversation. So if any of you have teenagers or young adults, you know that they are great at arguing and they're always right in their own mind. And so it seems like they walk into every conversation wanting to argue with you and wanting to prove you wrong. And so I want to reassure you, I'm not talking about that kind of an argument. I don't want you to butt heads with your prospects, with your clients, but I do want you to approach this almost like you're a defense attorney and you're needing to prove your case. And so these are going to be the 2 arguments that we park on, likelihood and impact, because they're both very, very important. And you'll see that as we move forward. Now, I have a ton of information. I'm going to over deliver. I will deliver as quickly as I can and still get the concepts across. I'll answer as many of your questions as I can at the end. But in case I leave you with unanswered questions, it's never my intent, but it does sometimes happen. Or even worse, the webinar ends and then you immediately think of a question. You're like, oh, I wish I would have asked that while we were inside of the session. Please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Connect with me whether you have questions or not. I love to connect with MSPs and MSSPs. So connect with me on LinkedIn. You can look for Jennifer Bleam, but you can also search for Cybersecurity Sherpa. I'm the only one of those. And so I'm very easy to find on LinkedIn. And then you can also reach out to me via email. I had someone actually do that this morning and they reached out to me and said, hey, I was just asked to do a panel on a particular topic. How do you think I should approach this? And typically what I do is either throw resources at you or shoot a 5 or 10 or sometimes 15-minute Loom video and send it over to you. So I do whatever I can to help facilitate the growth of your business and the marketing of your business, and ultimately so you get sales opportunities. So feel free to email me directly and I will answer. So with that in mind, let's talk about the risk-based selling matrix. If you've ever looked at any like Gartner Magic Quadrant resources or research, you know that they always start with this beautiful grid. And you can actually use this grid for a whole lot of things like time management tips and tricks and getting out of overwhelm and things like that. But for today, we are going to look at this in the perspective of how to sell. We're going to get to how to sell cybersecurity in a minute, but I want to talk about just how to sell in general. And so I've already talked about the concept of likelihood and the concept of impact. These are the two arguments that we want to make. So I want to draw for you a kind of a let's pretend or kind of a make-believe scenario. So just roll with me. I know for some of you it's afternoon and you're maybe just a little sleepy post-lunch. So don't like close your eyes and go to sleep on me, but I do want you to imagine for a minute. I want you to imagine that you have a 6,500 square foot mansion, like custom built mansion. For me, it would probably be 2 stories, probably all brick. I like grand entranceways, so probably like a two doors that both swing open and maybe a dual staircase to the top with a ginormous chandelier in the foyer. Like that's what I would have if I had a 6,500 square foot mansion. I don't know what you would have, but you probably have that in your mind. If you don't, grab that real quickly and just imagine with me. Imagine that you lived there and somebody came to your door. So the doorbell rings and there's a poor door-to-door salesperson and they're like, yes, you know, Mr. Homeowner, Mrs. Homeowner, beautiful house you have here. I don't want to take too much of your time on this beautiful Saturday. They always have like this spiel and they're like, I'm here to sell you bird strike insurance. That's right, Mr. Prospect. If a bird strikes your house and, you know, maybe breaks a window in your front door, we're going to replace it for free. Now, imagine you're in this 6,500 square foot custom built mansion. For me, double staircase, ginormous, you know, chandelier in the foyer. Let me ask you, would you buy? Kind of have a feeling like none of you would buy because you're down in this bottom left-hand quadrant where you're like, okay, the likelihood of a bird hitting one of my windows and breaking it, like I've never heard of that happening. Never. Like I don't know what world this person lives in that they think this is a clear and present danger, but I'm pretty sure that I am safe from bird strikes. Like in my neighborhood, birds don't just fly around and slam randomly into glass. So very, very, very unlikely that something will happen. And even if it did, even if like that crazy out of the world experience happened and I had to replace my front door, you know, $15K, or replace a front window. Again, remember, you live in a 6,500 square foot custom mansion. So, you know, $15K, no big deal. Like that's like half a payday, not even half a payday, right? Or it breaks a front window. You're like, okay, $1,500, whatever. Like, okay, let's put that, I'm just gonna write you a check, no big deal. So you are in this bottom quadrant, the bottom left-hand quadrant where you're like low likelihood and low impact. Not super likely to happen. And even if it did, it's going to have a very low impact on my world because I can afford it. It's not going to disrupt my life. It's not going to hurt me. It's at most going to be a little bit inconvenient, but not worth spending money on. So bottom left-hand quadrant. Okay, so now let's pretend same house, same beautiful architecture inside, whatever your wood tones are, whatever your vision of perfect home is. And let's just pretend like there was some random like EMP or something. And now all of a sudden, all of the birds have like lost their senses, their echolocation or whatever it is that says to them, danger, Will Robinson, don't fly into that. That's a window, you'll die. Let's pretend like all of that is gone. And now the likelihood of having a bird strike is very high. Are you going to buy? Well, you're still not going to buy because you're like, okay, like it might happen, but once again, the impact on me is pretty small. Like I can replace the window, I can replace the door, I can replace 10 windows. Not worth it because the impact on your life and on your budget is negligible. Now, believe it or not, if the doorbell rings and the poor sap on the other end is like, I'm here to sell you bird strike insurance, All of that goes through your mind in a split second. And you're thinking, why in the world would I buy bird strike insurance? I've never heard of a bird strike. And if a bird struck my house, okay, I'd roll with it. Like I'd figure out, like put in a claim with my normal homeowner's insurance. I'm sure that would cover it. And if it didn't cover it, I'd buy a new door or a new window. No problem. So in this make-believe scenario, you actually just experienced the risk-based selling matrix because you put yourself in one of the quadrants at which there's not going to be a decision. Because the only place that you will make a decision is in this upper right-hand quadrant, where the likelihood of something happening to you is high. And then if that thing happens, it's going to impact you in a very extreme manner. And so that is where you need to be able to move your prospects and your clients during the sales conversation. So understand that when you walk in, you are already in the upper right-hand quadrant. Like if I could see your faces and ask you to like raise your hand or give me a thumbs up or nod your head, like, do you think that if your clients were left to their own devices, would they have a very high likelihood of something happening to them? Yep, probably, because left to their own devices, they would maybe have antivirus on all of their machines. They certainly would not have EDR. They certainly would not have someone looking at it 24 hours a day. They most certainly would not have multi-factor authentication on everything. They might have multi-factor authentication on nothing. And so you and I know that it is very likely that something would happen to them. To make matters worse, as if that wasn't enough stacked in there against them, not in their favor, we know that 71% of threats are aimed at small businesses, small and medium-sized businesses, which is typically who you are targeting for your cybersecurity offer. And so we all know, like intuitively, if I took a poll, I bet this would be one of the rare polls that 90 to 100% of us would say yes. If our clients and prospects do nothing, there is a very high likelihood that they would be hit with a cybersecurity incident, a breach, a ransomware attack, a phishing attack. Maybe they put in their credentials and give away their Office 365 credentials, whatever that might be. So we know high likelihood. We also know high impact because we have had conversations with people who were devastated, who maybe had to close their doors, almost close their doors, maybe wished they would have closed their doors because they were down for weeks, 4, 6, 7 weeks of not being able to access data, not being able to transfer funds. And so be very careful when you walk in to a sales conversation that you are not making the assumption that your prospect, your client is exactly on the same page with you. So don't make the assumption that because you're in the upper right-hand quadrant, your prospect automatically is. So that's one point that I want you to understand. The second point is that these are two sides of the same coin. And what I mean by that is if you've ever studied persuasion, if you've studied sales, if you've studied marketing, you'll start to hear that people make decisions emotionally. Everybody, all of you, even those of you that are super like data oriented and you think in like if-then statements and flow charts and you think you believe you're making decisions analytically. You're actually making decisions emotionally. Now, you justify them logically, but you probably make decisions really, really, really fast. And then you dig into the numbers and the metrics and the if-then statements and the peer groups and things like that to justify your decisions. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not criticizing that. Every one of us makes decisions that way. And what that means from a sales standpoint is that you must prove both of those things. You need to prove the logic, but you also must provide the emotion that they will use to make that decision initially. So let's talk about logic first, and then we'll talk about emotion. So the logical side is the likelihood of this incident happening to them. The likelihood of if you do nothing, there's very likely going to have something happen to you. So I know I use the word likely to define likelihood, but I'm hoping that So the next few minutes, we're going to talk about how likely it is to happen to your client. Now, if you already have a great way to prove that or to suss that out, to have that conversation with someone, then you're great. And I would recommend that you start with this likelihood, the logical thing, because if you don't logically prove the need for your solution and you go straight for the emotion, what happens is that we all have this internal, like a BS detector, or you're just being a slimy salesperson detector. And we're like, you're just trying to sell me something that I don't need. And so if we don't prove that there is a need for it, then we can't even get to the latter part of the sales conversation. So this is proving you need what I'm going to sell you. And so this is there's a couple of different ways that you can have this conversation. I'm going to present one to you, and you can draw this out. I'm going to draw it out for you after I explain it, because it's a little bit hard to do on like a slide deck. So let me just talk it through with you, and then I'll explain how you can draw it if you choose to draw it. If you're the kind of person that you like to sketch on a piece of paper, or you want to draw inside of a Zoom sales call. But there's a couple of ways you can do this. So the first way is simply to say, or the first point is to simply say, Mr. Prospect, let's call him Richard. Richard, I'm sure you're aware that cybersecurity threats are growing, and that like small business owners are really the target of those attacks. And a lot of times it's because small business owners don't have super deep pockets, and they're also very busy, and they're pulled in a lot of different directions. And so therefore the bad guys know that the easiest ones to hit are the small business owners. Were you aware of that? And they'll probably say, well, I mean, yeah, I guess, sure. Okay, so trends are rising. Like if we were going to invest in something illegal, which I don't recommend, Richard, but if we were going to, we could invest in cybersecurity, bad guys. And it's probably a pretty safe bet that that investment is going to continue to grow and grow and grow. Not financial advice, wink, wink, nod, nod, like however you want to play that. So the threats are going up. So doesn't it make sense that if the threats are going up, the likelihood of you getting hit from one year to the next, that likelihood is also going up, unless you change something that you're doing, which, by the way, this is a good compliance conversation as well, but I'm going to stay focused on security. So does that make sense? Right, so that is all you're doing. Is can we agree that logically you are more likely to get hit today than in 2020 or in 2000, whatever, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, more likely today than 1 year ago. Now, if you want to draw this out, it looks like this. This is not exactly what the trend looks like. Like we all know, it's kind of this up and to the right, and it's I lost the word, but it's a hockey stick. Like it's ugly. It is the kind of thing we all want if we're investing, right? It's not linear, exponential. That's the word I couldn't find. So it's an exponential growth, but it's easier just to draw a straight line. So this is the growth, Mr. Client, Richard. And so obviously, as days go by, what is happening is your risk is what is kind of below that line. So back in 1998, at the very bottom, not a whole lot of risk. And it was also really easy to like take care of that risk and mitigate that risk and drop that risk almost to zero, because you put in a firewall. Okay, then let's fast forward a few years. You're like, okay, firewall's not enough anymore. Let's add some antivirus. I'll just like drive to Best Buy and get some antivirus. And that was really enough. And then it was like, oh, you know what? We better have firewall. We better have some antivirus. And then maybe we want to add backup to the solution. And that was probably in 2000. And so what you're saying is, over time, we've invested more and more to try to mitigate the threat. However, what I'm telling you is that if you're not doing some bare minimum things, you're not keeping up with the threat. And so my goal in this conversation is to figure out where we need to lower that lever to. In other words, there is a level of risk that you're comfortable with. So for example, if I said to you, Richard, that every we can reduce your risk to the point where you probably will only lose an hour of data and a day or two of time. That's probably fine. You'd be like, if that's all a cyber threat is going to cost me, no big deal. But if it's going to cost you 3 weeks of data, like we lost the last 3 weeks of data, and you can't do anything for the next 2 or 3 weeks, is that level of risk okay with you? And so what my goal during this conversation is to understand what is acceptable for you, what is not, so that we can put pieces in place to reduce your risk to the level that you're comfortable. So all you're doing is saying, can we agree that doing what you did yesterday is not going to stop today's threats? And so it's that logical and that simple. It's fairly short. Now, let me pause for a minute, because I made it sound like you are going to create custom one-off solutions for every single one of your clients and prospects. Don't do that. You will come back in 2 years and you will kill me and you will hate me, because operationally, it is very, very difficult to deliver on 17 flavors of managed security. So I'm not suggesting that you create 17 different flavors. But what I am saying is that what you're going to sell will be the benefits of different pieces of your stack. So I'm going to make the assumption that all of you require multi-factor authentication on everything. And I'm going to assume that up until now, none of your clients have argued with you. They've all just gladly accepted multi-factor authentication with open arms and high fives. I know I'm being sarcastic. I know all of you probably have clients that pushed back, and some of you stood your ground, some of you did not. But my point is, if your solution, your one solution that you're offering includes multi-factor authentication, but you uncover that it's going to be a major stumbling block, then you don't sell that benefit or that feature. You still include it in what you're rolling out because you are still the expert, but let's not talk about something that the client doesn't care about. So let me kind of bring this from cybersecurity down to real life. Let's talk about cars for a second. I don't know a whole lot about cars, but I care about 3 things: the color, the sound of the engine. So silly, I know it's so silly, like that's how I would buy a car. The color, the sound of the engine, and I like a sunroof. And like bonus if it's got like a soft top or it's a convertible. That's like a bonus, that's not a mandatory. So if you're selling a car to me, you should talk about how the engine sounds. Don't talk to me about V and then some number after it, because it doesn't mean anything to me. I want it to sound fun and throaty. And if you're the salesperson and you hear me use the words fun and throaty, that's what you should talk about. Don't say V8, V2, V4, V77. Don't talk to me about horsepower. None of that means anything to me. I want fun and throaty. And if I want fun and throaty, do not talk to me about the sound system. Do not talk to me about the fold down picnic table in the back of the car. I don't care about that. I care about color, sunroof, and a fun, throaty sounding engine. That's it. Those are the only 3 benefits you should talk about to me. Even though all the other stuff comes bundled in the same car, don't talk to me about them. Those are not benefits or features that I care about. So very quickly, as a recap, all you're doing is saying, can we agree that if left to your own devices and threats continue to grow, that your risk is increasing? Is that okay with you? Well, no, but budget and okay, no, we'll talk about budget. I'm pretty confident we'll have something that'll fit in your budget, but can we at least agree in theory that something might need to be done? Well, yeah, okay, I guess. Awesome. That's all you're looking for. You're just looking for a scent that logically you've checked the box. The next piece is actually more fun and it's a little bit easier. And the next piece is to demonstrate impact. And so you'll hear sales trainers say impact or business impact or business implications. All of that answers the age-old question, so what? Or what's in it for me? And what you want to do is you want to align the business impact to the swim lane of the person you're talking to. Okay, so we've just gotten them to admit or to agree that, okay, left to our own devices, yes, something could happen. So if we go back to that Gartner Magic Quadrant, the first thing we're talking about is likelihood. So they are now slid all the way over to the far right, likelihood. But right now, they're still like, but I could roll with it. It'd be okay. And if you've ever gotten a sales objection where someone says, well, we have insurance, what they're saying is, I believe the impact would be small. If they say to you, well, I don't think we're a target, or what data do I have that the bad guys want? What they're saying is, I don't think it's very likely that something will happen. So now this risk-based selling matrix not only lets you go in and guide your conversations because you're picturing them moving up and to the right, but you can also go back to old sales calls and say, what objections did I hear? And because I heard that objection, which quadrant were they in? And that tells me which of your pieces of your sales process need the most work. So when I say demonstrate impact, and I say to align this with the swim lane of the person that you're in, ConnectWise used to have these illustrations. They were like workflow diagrams, and essentially they were across the bottom, each of the different swim lanes inside of ConnectWise. So you had like sales and marketing, which, I mean, let's face it, ConnectWise tries to deliver on sales and marketing, but it's not great. We all know that. That's not what it was designed to do, but they kind of bolted some things on. So, we've got the sales and marketing swim lane. And then we have the finance swim lane. Then we have the operations swim lane. And those are really kind of the biggest moving pieces. And so I want you to think about, who are you speaking to? Who is in the boardroom? And tailor your discovery questions to that swim lane. So for ease of use, I'm just going to say the CEO, the director of ops, the director of finance or VP of finance or CFO, and then the VP of business development. Their whole job is sales and marketing. Well, right now, in the midst of a training session, it all makes complete sense, because if I said to you, what are the kind of, in fact, I'm going to open up chat and I'm going to make you guys comment inside of chat. Oh, I may not be able to see it. Hold on, because I have so many screens open. But if you were talking to a CFO, what kind of things would the CFO care about? What do you think? I'm super comfortable with silence. So drop something in the chat. What does the CFO care about? I see someone chatting. Hint F, CFO, cost. I love it. What else does the CFO care about? Price, cost. Yep, I like it. Waiting for one more. Someone's typing. Steve is typing. Thank you. ROI. Yes, ROI. Profit. In your world, utilization, right? Those are the things that you care about. So as you're walking through your discovery process, if one of the people that you're talking to, one of the people that's inside of the boardroom is in that finance role, controller, CFO, VP of, even sometimes VP of ops, because sometimes they will be wearing multiple hats, those individuals care about money. They care about top line revenue. They care about how much is flowing to the bottom line. They may care about the commitment, the terms, like they're detail oriented people. They also, typically, they will make connections very quickly. So you're like, if this, and they're like, oh, well, then that, I get it. I'm right there with you. Like they're almost, once you win them over, they almost finish your sentences. They're very difficult to win over, and they typically play their cards very close to their chest. So you've got to be aware of this when you're in a sales conversation and you're talking to a CFO. So if you're talking to a CFO, what kinds of things would you talk about? Well, I always default to ransomware because it's the easiest to have a conversation about. So I would say, okay, you can say Mrs. CFO. Let's pretend like this CFO is a woman. Mrs. CFO, I'm sure you've heard about this thing called ransomware. Are you familiar with what it is? She's going to say yes. You're going to say, awesome, just to make sure we're both on the same page. You're talking about like when a bad guy somehow gets access to your data, scrambles it all up, and then like holds it hostage and says, I'll give it all back to you if you pay the ransom. We're both on the same page, right? Of course we are. So you now politely educated this person on what ransomware is, even though she just said, I know what ransomware is. You still educated her, and you're like, okay, so they've now got all your data held hostage, and you've got to scramble and find, like, I don't know, Bitcoin and transfer Bitcoin to them. Do you know how to buy Bitcoin? I don't know how to buy Bitcoin either. Well, we would figure it out, because if this happened with your current provider, you're probably not going to call them. You're probably going to call me. So we're going to have to figure out how to buy Bitcoin. And we're talking a lot of money, like $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 to pay that ransom, to pay, you know, they're holding your data hostage. Let me just ask you, where's that $80,000 coming from? And then you be quiet and you let that person figure it out. Now they may have an answer. They're like, oh no, we've got that. That's in our, you know, secondary operating fund. We're good to go. There's 100K in there. We pull 75 out. We go to like the Bitcoin ATM and, you know, suck out a Bitcoin. We're good to go. I'm being a little bit sarcastic, but because I don't think there is such a thing as a Bitcoin ATM. But if they've got an operating fund, okay, great, wonderful. So we just pulled 75K out of curiosity. What were you going to use that 75K for? And the CFOs always have an answer. That is always earmarked, even if the CEO doesn't know it, even if it's never been discussed in their board meeting. That 75K or that 100K that's in the bank, it's for something. It's for a new roof. It's for a new team member. It's to fund a great Christmas party. Like what they have, there's a plan. They don't just stick money away for a rainy day. There's a plan. So, okay, so we have the funds. Oh, okay, so great. We can now get our Bitcoin. But out of curiosity, what was that money going to be used for? Oh, for a new team member. Oh, for sales? What kind of team member? Oh, so that was going to drive growth. So when are you going to hire that new team member now that that 75K hypothetically is now being paid to the ransom holder or the hostage person, the criminal? Oh, well, it'll probably take us another year to like get to the point where we've got those funds set aside. Okay, so now we're going to have to put that hire off for a year. So what does that do to your growth trajectory? What does that do to your profitability? What does that do to your projections? What does that do for like maybe a possible acquisition, someone that was thinking of acquiring you? Ugh. So is that a big deal or a little deal? Like, do we need to make sure we mitigate and reduce that risk when we put together our package for you, or is that okay? So I hope you can see how I took one thing, ransomware. Ransomware, we didn't even talk about the downtime. We didn't talk about, is it going to keep you down for 3 weeks? We could have talked about that, but we simply said, in this case, ransomware, 75K, do you have the money, yes or no? In an ideal world, let's flow chart it out. We just took it down the yes path. Yes, I have the money. Okay, what were you going to use it for? Oh, so now what? We can't hire that person. We can't replace the roof. What happens if a tree, you know, falls on the roof? What happens if there's a leak? Like whatever. Until you get a little bit of feeling, a little bit of pain, and their realization that a ransomware attack would indeed impact them. Because remember, walking in the door, you're in the upper right. You're like, attack would impact you. I know that. I've got to make this sale because if I don't know how I'm going to sleep at night. I'm going to feel horrible if I read your name in the paper in a month and I didn't make the sale. But don't let your emotions drive. You need to get their emotions to where they're matching you. And so coming in the door, they don't think it's going to impact them at all. So that's CFO. Let's talk about sales and marketing. What do salespeople care about? So you're talking to the VP of sales or head of business development. What do salespeople care about? What is that VP of sales responsible for? I'm looking at the chat. You guys thought you were done with the chat. What does the VP of sales care about? I like it. One of you is typing. VP of sales. Because remember, if we're in a conversation, we need to tailor that conversation to the swim lane that this person lives in. So the salesperson or the VP of sales probably has quotas to hit. Reputation, that's really good, because I've always thought of reputation as just being something that the CEO cares about, which is true. The CEO cares about reputation, but you're right. The salespeople, very, very good point. I actually have a client who was hit with ransomware, and I think 12 of his clients were hit also, and he's rebranding because his reputation took a hit. Very, very good point. Marketing and bringing in prospects. Interesting. So how would a breach or a phishing attack where somebody put their credentials in and now they lost access to their CRM or their funnel building software or their one of their 17 marketing tools that companies have, ability to get contracts signed, right? How frustrating would it be to be like, okay, I'll get that contract right over to you. Look for that by close of business. You hang up, and Murphy, who seems to like lurk in the shadows, Murphy's Law strikes, and you're not able to get that contract out because you can't access your tools because your system is shut down. So now you're talking to the VP of sales and you're saying, so how would it impact you in relation to your quarterly goals? 12 weeks, right? Quarter's only 12 weeks, 12 and a half weeks. If you were dead in the water, you couldn't issue quotes, you couldn't receive quotes, you couldn't put anybody new into your pipeline, you couldn't push anybody along in your pipeline, and that was the case for 2 to 3 weeks. So we're, what is 3 over 12, 1/4, 25% of your quarter, you were not able to push deals forward. How would that impact your revenue? How would that impact your personal bonus structure? How would that impact your quota, your annual quota? Would you see turnover? Would you have team members who were like this close to hitting quota, but because they didn't, because of a cybersecurity incident, it's the last straw. They're like, I'm leaving, I'm done. I can't do this. Bye, see you later. And now you're having to hire. So you're having these conversations in the swim lanes where the people live, talking about the things that they care about. So we've talked about finance, we've talked about sales. Let's talk about owner, CEO, which a lot of you on this call are the owner or the CEO. So we've already said reputation. What does the owner or the CEO care about? Growth. I think that is an answer to my question. If not, it can be. So growth, the CEO cares about growth. The CEO cares about reputation, productivity. Yes, because we all know payroll is the biggest, line item on the budget. So the CEO wants to make sure that I'm getting what I'm paying for. So staying in business, efficiency, maybe their intellectual property not being leaked out and for everybody to see, maybe their customer list, maybe their future hopes and dreams of getting acquired. They probably don't care so much about the details and tracking of the numbers and the metrics and tracking time. That would be more the VP of Ops that is going to care about that. So if you're having a conversation and the owner is in the room, you're like, okay, so we've talked about the fact that it's very likely that something could happen. And it's normal to feel, it couldn't really happen to me. And so I would just bounce back. So let me ask you, Sally CEO, how do you think it would impact you in the marketplace if this became public knowledge that you had a breach? That somebody, the FBI comes knocking on your door, and as luck would have it, somebody's sitting on your porch with their iPhone, like filming the whole thing, and the FBI comes in and they leave with banker boxes, and that's on the news. How would that impact you in the marketplace? How would that impact your culture, your creativity? A good question is, who's going to call your biggest clients? Who's going to call all of your clients? Because for most of you, the size organizations that you're selling to, under 100 seats, under 100 employees, the CEO, while he or she has elevated himself to a leadership position, this company is still their baby. And they still have a relationship with their biggest clients. And so now the question becomes, so who are the biggest clients that you would want to call personally and say, we've had a cybersecurity incident. We don't think any of your data was touched, but we're still researching it. We'll let you know as soon as we know more. But in the meantime, our response time, our delivery schedule, our whatever it is that they are into our widget making factory, is going to be much slower than usual because we've got this massive situation on our hands, and we're going to do right by you and we're going to do everything we can. But I just wanted to make this personal phone call and make sure you heard it from me first before it hits the news. Hopefully it won't, but we value your business and your partnership. And so I wanted to make that call. Who's calling them? Is that you? Is it going to be a team member? Oh, it's you. Okay, so how many of these clients are there? 40. Okay, so how long is it going to take you to call 40 clients? Oh, so you're going to do that during the day, because you're probably also talking to legal, and you're talking to your insurance broker, and you're probably talking to the press. So who's making those phone calls? Oh, you are in the evenings. Great. And I'm assuming the spousal figure is just super happy that you're going to be working these really late evenings for the next week. Ugh. And so if we had more time, what I do is I unpack, how is this going to impact the company? How is this going to impact your role in the company? And then how is this going to impact you personally? Because especially, it's a little different with a CEO, but especially with an employee, they care about the company, like that's where they get their paycheck from, but then they care about their team a whole lot. How is this going to impact the day-to-day of their team? But let's face it, like we all worry about number one the most. And so instead of talking about the company, which we should, and instead of talking about how this could impact the team, which we also should, if we can tie this in to how this is going to impact you personally, your time, your bonus, your trajectory, how are you going to have to talk about this when you go to interview for your next job? Are you going to lose your job? Like, number one is always the most impact and the most emotion. And so that's the second piece of this matrix that you have to be willing to have that conversation about. So let me do a quick recap because we talked about the risk-based selling matrix and how the goal is to move up and to the right where we have logically proven, hey, this is super likely to happen. We've emotionally helped them feel, here's how it could impact the company, my role, and me personally. And so as we unpack that, we talked about the likelihood. And we would never buy bird strike insurance because it's very unlikely to happen. And we also wouldn't buy bird strike insurance because it's not very likely to impact us. There'd be no impact on our budget or our world. And so that's what I want you to think about as you go into your next sales calls and as you go through and evaluate previous sales calls that didn't go so well. It didn't go quite the way that you wanted it to. So I do want to pause for a couple of questions, but this is what I do all day long. I love it. I've got a whole 9-step system that I walk MSPs through to help them install a sales and marketing process so that you can get lead gen and so that you can add extra MRR to your book of business every single month. So if you're curious about what that could look like for us to work together, send me an email, jennifer@mspsalesrevolution.com. Put the word curious in the subject line, and then I will personally respond to you. I'm happy to have that conversation with any of you, but I do want to open this up for Q&A because I know I covered a whole lot of topics, and I want to see if there are any questions or concerns, things that I left out that you'd like to get some clarity on.
So if you want to type in those questions in the Q&A section, that'd be great. And so while we're waiting to see if any questions do come in, Jennifer, I while you were talking, I had this personal experience. Now, it had nothing to do with cybersecurity, but it was textbook, the decision-making process that you were talking about, and the fact that I came home from vacation recently, and I noticed that my heat pump was making crazy noises, and I'm thinking that's not good in the summer around here. No. And so anyway, I call the company, and they come in, and sure enough, it sounded like the blower motor, and that was going to go, and it was just the bearings were shot. It was working, but it was going to go. And anyway, so they came in and they said, yeah, it'll be this much to fix that. And so what's the likelihood of the blower motor going? It's very high. But
Right.
what's the likelihood of the rest of the system going? Because they said, that the rest of that system is 21 years old.
Oh,
So, and it's like, what's the average life expectancy of a heat pump? So, of course,
probably.
they went through the whole likelihood of that thing failing,
Yes.
and of
Yes.
course, it was going to be a stretch of 100-degree days here, coming in a couple of days, and of course, I can get you a whole new system here in 2 days, and so then, so now we know that the likelihood of it is going, and then what's the impact? It's going to be 100 degrees.
Degrees. Yes. Yes.
So the impact was very obvious, and he was good. My BS meter was going on at certain points where it's like, he's got this like really high end system. He's like, you could have this, but to your point, none of the features of that system were anything I was interested in.
Yep.
I got a good system. It's great. I love it now. But it was a lot more than I wanted to spend. But he made the point, and he said, look, that's going to fail. And sure enough, the day before they installed the system, the blower motor went completely gone.
Oh.
So, I had 1 day of 100-degree heat without any air conditioning. So that was good timing anyway.
Well, but I do like what you said. I always encourage my clients when they are in a buying scenario and they're the buyer, they're the purchaser, they're not the salesperson, to of course be engaged and be in that buying process, but watch, like be aware, like almost step outside of yourself and be aware of what's happening. Like when are you inside of your head rolling your eyes and going, you are so monologuing right now and I don't care about that, and you go, oh, do I monologue? Am I say, oh, I wonder, I bet I
Right.
monologued a little too much. Or, oh my goodness, you did not listen to me. I said I cared about this and I didn't care about that. And you just keep talking about that part, the thing I don't care about. Do I do that in my sales calls? And so maybe you do. And so if you're using every sales situation, even when you're the buyer, as a way to troubleshoot your own and just to bring awareness to how sales calls make you feel when they're done right, like why was that so good? Why was that so smooth? Like we just got to the end and I went, sounds great. What did he or she do that was so great? And how can I replicate that in my sales process? All right, so I cannot see the Q&A. It's throwing an error. I'm sure there's someone on this call that would be happy to troubleshoot that with me.
Okay.
But if you can feed me the questions, I am happy to answer them.
Looks like one came in chat. How often do you talk about compliance in terms of security and ask them if they have to comply with any regulations?
Yeah, so I would definitely ask that as part of, I would actually probably know that as part of the pre-research going in. I call it Google stalking people. Ethically Google stalk them. You should know what industry they're in. If you know the industry that they're in, then you can Google, like, is this industry required compliance? Is compliance required? I also like to look at like the main trade or the main trade publications for that industry. And so if they're in manufacturing, you can say manufacturing publications and just scan through the last 3 or 4 months, because that will tell you, is compliance a big deal or not? Is security a big deal or not? And then you can just say, yeah, if you just saw in Manufacturing R Us back in April, they were actually talking about ransomware. And did you see that chart? Like that was ugly. It was jagged and growing. And yeah, like your own trade association is recommending that you do something, and you just told me you haven't done anything for a year, or 5 years or 7 years. Like that means that you are protecting yourself with. And I always like make a joke. I don't have a calculator. What was 7 years ago? And I make them do the math. And then I'm like, okay, so you're protecting yourself as if it is the year X, but it's actually the year 2023. Are you comfortable with that? And they're like, oh, I don't know. When you put it like that, I don't know if I like that at all. Like, okay, well, that's just the reality. I didn't put it anywhere. I just asked the question. So if we kind of circle back to compliance, yes, I would definitely ask, or no, I'd ask if they have to be compliant, or I would do some light education. Like, Did you know you have to be compliant? Did you know there's a deadline coming up, or you missed a deadline by 3 to 6 months? Are you aware of the differences between cybersecurity and compliance? Because they're not necessarily the same. Maybe we should have a conversation about that. So yes, I would talk about it, but mainly only if they care.
Right.
I would liken this to like HIPAA compliance 10 years ago. The majority of doctors just didn't care. They should have cared, but there was no teeth behind the compliance regulation. It was an aging demographic at the time, so there were a lot of doctors saying, I'll just retire, I don't care. And so every prospect isn't a prospect. You can't make them care about compliance. You can't make them care about 3 weeks of downtime. Like, some people just don't believe it's going to impact them.
Right. But it's actually, and this is one of the things that I think, you can factor into your ransomware discussion is, people think ransomware, they lock my files, I pay the ransom and they unlock my files. But a lot of times what happens during a ransomware attack is data is exfiltrated and it's used against you. They're going to release this. And that's when the rubber does hit the road. It's like, you may not care about compliance before, but now all of a sudden, especially if you're a medical practice and it's HIPAA, or even today with the FTC safeguards rule, which applies to so much more of a broad, audience these days, that, you could be facing serious fines over and above your downtime. So,
yes, and it's a reportable offense, right? Or a reportable incident. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. While that's coming in, just again, another little plug for my OTX roundtable. Again, getting back to compliance and improving your security posture. That's what we do with OTX roundtable. If you want to know more about it, you can go to my website, otxpartners.com, or send me an email at mjennings@otxpartners.com, and I'd be happy to chat with you a little bit more about that. So let's wrap it up here. Again, I will send out the link to the recording. Probably take me a couple of days to get this edited and posted. So look forward to that. And again, if you're interested in either Jennifer's services or mine, please feel free to reach out. We'd love to speak with you on both. All right. Thank you again, Jennifer. And thank you all for attending. I appreciate you all coming.
Thank you.
All right. Have a great day, everybody.